Hello everybody, my name is Shmuel Rabin, and for many years I have been serving as a chazan, a leader of the services throughout the year as well, but mainly and especially during the high holidays which are coming up. And I'd like to give some talk explaining a little bit about the background and the history of the special prayers which are added, which we encounter during these special days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And a question which many people end up asking, or even if they can't summon up enough courage to actually ask it verbally, but they may be thinking it, is that being that the prayers are so much longer and so much more complicated than usual, and if a person is praying in Hebrew, a person might not have the opportunity and all the time to actually study and understand the meaning of everything that he or she is saying. And the person might think, why do I need all this? Maybe it would be better for me to pray in my own words, or to only use part of the prayer book and leave the rest up to God, as it were. And I'd like to put forward some thoughts which can help a person make a decision as to what direction to take in the prayers. So first of all, if we look in the history of how the prayers came to be formulated, the Rambam, Maimonides, explains that what is prayer? Where do we know? Where is it written in the Torah that someone should pray? So there is actually no fixed commandment that one has to pray every day, or there is also no particular order and text which one has to use from the biblical standpoint, from the Torah. But what is the actual mitzvah? What is the commandment? That one should turn to God whenever one has a request, whenever one needs something. That is the main nucleus, the main idea of prayer. And the source for that is what is written in the Torah, we say in the Shema twice every day, that you should serve God with all your heart. What does it mean, service which comes from the heart? This is prayer. So how did it come that prayer became a fixed text? So the Rambam explains further that throughout the time when the Jews were living in Israel, for the first few hundred years, when eventually they had the Beit HaMikdash, the temple was built, so everybody would say the prayers out of their own heart. And that's where we find this many times throughout history. People turned to God when they needed help. For example, Hannah, when she visited the Mishkan, the temple, when she didn't have any children, and she turned to God with her own words. It's written in the book of Shmuel, the text of what she actually said. She spoke her own words. And this was the general idea of prayer. We have it many times. We have Chizkiyahu, who was told by the prophet that his time on earth had ended as a form of punishment. And Chizkiyahu prayed to God, turned his face towards the wall, and he said a few short words of prayer, which are also recorded in the book of Malachim. So there we find many similar examples. So prayer is essentially, according to this basic school of thought, which is the most simple one, is that you turn to God just the same way as you would turn to anybody else. You will be making a request. As we're going to see, there are also other meanings of prayer, but this is the most basic and simple one. So this state of affairs continued, that everybody would pray in their own words, their own formulation, without a fixed text. It continued that way while the Beit HaMikdash was standing in Jerusalem. Then the Jews were exiled from Jerusalem by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, and most of the Jews were shipped off to Babylon. And they were there in Babylon for 70 years of exile. During the time of exile, the Jews who had originally been speaking in a pure Hebrew, the language of the Torah, they began to mix their language with various other dialects and various other languages, until it came about that many people could not use a clear language. They didn't know how to formulate the words in a clear language. And this is also attested to in the book of Nehemiah, where it says that some people spoke half Hebrew, half a different language. So when people wanted to speak clear language to God, so they couldn't express themselves adequately. So then it came about that there was a takana, an institution, which radically changed the way that people look at prayer. And that takana was that there should be a fixed text of prayer, which is the basic and the most important prayer which we have today in the Siddur, which is called the Shmona Esrei, which is also called the Amidah, which means to stand. It's what we say in Shacharis, Mincha, Mariv, in the morning, the afternoon, and evening services. The nucleus of those services is that there is a prayer where we stand with our feet together, facing the direction of Jerusalem. And this is the main prayer. In fact, in the Mishnah and the Talmud, this is generally refers to as the tefillah. Whenever it says tefillah, generally it's referring to the Shmona Esrei or the Amidah. And what does this consist of? It consists of 18 blessings, or brachot, which nowadays there are 19. We'll speak about this a little later, or maybe in a separate class. The Amidah is divided with these 18 or 19 blessings into 3 parts. The first part, the first 3 blessings, is like preparation for the request. It's not actually a request of God, but it is the praise of God. It's written, a person should always first praise and then make the request. The middle part is the actual requests, which is 12 or 13 blessings. So here, what the sages did when they instituted this tefillah was they put together a list of all the basic requests which are needed, so that whenever anybody has any request, they could have all the requests there available. And they made the fixed text that everybody should say all the blessings. And the last part, which is also 3 blessings, is taking leave, as it were, of God and giving thanks to Him. So here you have something very different to what prayer was originally thought and imagined to be. Originally it didn't have a fixed text. People actually did use their own words. But then, because of difficulty in people expressing themselves in their own words, so the sages instituted that there should be a fixed text. So now there is actually an interesting question which commentaries go at length into this. I'm not going to go into it because it's complicated depending on which commentary you read. But there is a sort of question. So granted that the sages instituted there should be these 18 blessings, did they also institute exactly the text which should be said? So at first glance it seems pretty clear that if this takana, the institution of saying the Shmona Esrei, the Amidah, were to have any use, were to be able to get rid of the problem that people were not able to express themselves in Hebrew, so it would have been necessary for the sages to actually not just give a general framework of what these blessings should entail, but it makes sense that they would actually formulate the exact text, because if they would only give a general guideline, so people who didn't know Hebrew well enough, which was what the problem was, they would still be left without the guidance as to what to actually say. So it makes sense to say that they actually did institute the fixed text, not just as what general structure of the blessings should be, but also that each word was well thought out and catered towards the needs of the person who would actually be approaching in order to pray. They could actually pray, daven, and say the words without stumbling and stopping and trying to search and find the right words. But on the other hand, there is what's called halakha. And that is, the halakha defines, Jewish law defines exactly what is essential for each blessing and what is not essential. In other words, that we have certain rules about how blessings are formulated. That usually any blessing, not just in the Shemona Esrei, but all blessings, they have the formula Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam. They start off with that formula. And occasionally, they won't start off with that formula, just like in the Shemona Esrei. Not all the blessings start off like that, but they finish like that. They finish Baruch Atah Hashem. So that's called the Chatimah, the ending of each blessing. So if it's a long blessing, there'll be a beginning, a main part, and the Chatimah. And there is a rule that just before the Chatimah, there is always supposed to be a group of words, a phrase leading into the Chatimah that has the same content as the actual Chatimah. So, for example, if you take the first blessing of the Shemona Esrei, it finishes off Melech, Ozer, U'Mashiach, U'Magen. King, helper, savior, and a shield. That is the phrase which goes right before the ending, before the Chatimah of the blessing. The Chatimah itself is Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avraham. Blessed are you, Hashem, the shield of Abraham. So the phrase before the Chatimah mentions the word Magen, shield, which could be a question for those who are initiated in the Siddur, in the order of the prayers. If you just mention shield, why are you mentioning it again? And that is the case in all the blessings. All blessings, just before the last phrase, they say the same content again. And this is part of halacha. So that you see that there are sometimes clear boundaries as to what should be said in a blessing. But on the other hand, there is no requirements in halacha about everything else, about what should be said in the middle part of the blessing. As long as obviously each blessing has a subject, so it shouldn't stray too far from the subject. Otherwise, it's clear that it's not the subject of the actual prayer. So on one hand, you have a clear indication that there was a fixed text. But on the other hand, since you have certain boundaries in halakha, so it's clear that there is a fixed text, but it's still possible to move it and to tweak it one way or another. And here's what we come to in a very interesting statement in the Mishnah, which says as follows. Which means that someone who makes his prayer as a keva, which means as a fixed duty, so his prayer is not considered tachanunim, which means in entreaty. It's not considered a request for God's grace. It won't be accepted favorably. So what does it actually mean if somebody makes his prayer a fixed duty? So the Talmud goes into various explanations of what the Mishnah means. And the main explanation is, obviously, that when one goes forward to pray, one has to mean what one is saying. You shouldn't just do it just because he has to fulfill the obligation to pray. So just doing it, I'm not really feeling what I'm saying, but you have to put some kavanah, you have to put intention into it, and meaning into it, and heart into it. And that is the real meaning of prayer. But there's also another point, and that is that if one repeats the same words day after day, week after week, year after year, so eventually the words will not have the same meaning that they did the first time. When you see a prayer for the first time, everything is exciting, it's new. When you just repeat the same thing over and over again, so people, as we said at the beginning, begin having these questions. Why do I have to say exactly these words? Maybe I should use different words. I might feel better if I use my own words. So here you have really two approaches you could have. On the one hand, there definitely is a mila, there's an advantage to having the fixed text of the Siddur. Bearing in mind that those who composed the prayers, they were not just simple people who just happened to be inspired, and they put forward their words as a suggestion, and it's open to anybody to make the same way of suggesting words from themselves. Obviously, whatever anybody could come up with, even if it will be in total pure Hebrew, would not be the same in caliber, would not be the same in contact and meaning, and it would not be so loaded as the words which the sages who lived during the time of the Second Temple and shortly afterwards, that they put into it. So no matter what we could come up with, it's still not going to be the same as the words of the sages. On the other hand, it's understood that the person shouldn't feel that the prayer is a burden. And it says, if you are repeating words over and over again and you don't feel any meaning in them, so there might be some leeway as to saying your own words. And here is something which I hope to go into more in depth another occasion. But you see something very interesting with regarding to the special prayers which were composed for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And that is that they were originally composed with the intention that they should not be fixed. In other words, nowadays we have the prayer book for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we repeat. We actually do the same thing on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as we do the rest of the year. We say everything which is written inside the book. And we say the same words one year as we say the year before. But originally, when the composers of the special poems, which are known as piyutim in Hebrew, when they composed these prayers, it was actually never their intention that these prayers should actually be said year in and year out. The whole purpose of these prayers was that it should be not fixed. So even though now they are fixed, but in a way they still retain a special flavor in that they are not fixed. I'll try to give an example of something similar where we find that something is part of the prayer but still not part of the prayer. As we know, there is in the morning prayers every day we say Psalm 20, which is very good for, people say it for all types of trouble whenever there's a problem, that Psalm 20 is one of those chapters which is said very often. And we say it in the morning prayer, after Ashrei and before Uva L'Sion. But we only say it during days when we say Tachanun. On days when you do not say Tachanun, you skip Psalm 20 from the prayer. However, it is the Chabad custom that, being that you say every day after the morning prayers, you say a portion of Tehillim of Psalms. So on those days when Tachanun is not said, and therefore Psalm 20 was not said during the Shachris, during the morning prayer, we say Psalm 20 after the prayer before the daily recitation of Tehillim. So you see something very interesting here. On the surface, why do we not say Psalm 20 on days when Tachanun is not said? Because the content of this psalm, it would seem that it is not fitting for this semi-festive day, so we skip it. But on the other hand, you do say it after the prayer. So the question is, what's the difference? If we can say it after the prayer, why can't we say it in the prayer? So you see there's something very subtle here. That something could be said every day, but it makes a difference as to whether it's perceived as part of the prayer or something additional. So Psalm 20 cannot be said as part of the prayer because the spirit of the day doesn't allow for it. However, as an addition to prayer, it's still permissible and it's still actually said. So you see that something could be said and that there's nothing to differentiate it. If you just hear the words, you can't tell whether it's being said as part of the prayer or not as part of the prayer. It sounds the same way. You use the same tune if you say it with a tune. But it still makes a difference as to whether it's officially part of Shacharis or not. So here, we could possibly say that many of the prayers of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, even though they are actually said every year, in a certain sense, they never lost this specific flavor of being additional. I'll come back to this again at length another time. But here we could get a little bit of inspiration. If sometimes a person could think, why do I need to say all this? I've said it already so many times. But when one reminds himself that the whole purpose of these prayers was in order to make the prayer more meaningful, and that people shouldn't have to say just the regular prayers, that they should have something extra, something more poetic to whet the appetite of those who are praying. So that could give us an insight into, and to also continually find something new in those prayers and also in the prayers which one says every day. So much so that we could truly take it to heart, and the prayer should come from our heart as well as just from our mouth. I'd like to wish everybody they should be written, inscribed and sealed for a good year, a good and sweet year, in such a way that just we can taste the honey of Rosh Hashanah, just like our mouth can taste that it's sweet. The same thing, we should be able to feel all the blessings which Hashem should give us for the coming year, and the prayers also, which the words of the prayers are also considered as sweet as honey, so we should be able to appreciate that and truly ask God for a good and sweet year. Thank you very much.